James Lupton, delighted to be joined with a good friend of mine, Paul Zanon. Paul, today we're going to talk about writing, how to write a book, how to write autobiography. How do you start? What's the first place you look at?
Yeah, so I'm probably the most unorthodox ghostwriter out there, to be honest. Having failed English language at school, God knows how many times, not being able to explain grammar to anybody in any particular sense. I really have no idea what a verb, an adjective, a noun, or any of that stuff is. For me, it's all about stringing words together and making them sound good. And for me, the art of good ghostwriting is making the book sound like that the voice is literally spilling off the page of the person you're writing about. So whether it be Jimmy Tibbs is going to be sort of the growly East End London accent, or you've got Paul Ingle, you've got to get that sort of North Yorkshire accent spilling off. You've got to make sure that's captured. I'll sort of take a step back in terms of how I got into the whole sort of ghostwriting arena, and then I guess the tips along the way that I learned, which have certainly helped. So about sort of 10 odd years ago, I was a business development director for a national charity, and the opportunity came up to ghost to write the autobiography of Jimmy Tibbs. Basically, I'd known Mark Tibbs for many years, and I said, listen, I know Jimmy's got a good life, and I'd love to be able to approach him to maybe write it. So anyway, I've gone in there. I know that Jimmy had been approached by some big names and people in America and all sorts. And I met up with him at the old TKO gym down in Canning Town. And I'll be honest, I went into the meeting kind of thinking he was just going to say no, because I mean, he'd said no to so many other people. And we chatted for about 3 hours, and I was pretty much drained. And at the end, I stood up and Jim, I said, I can only guarantee you 3 things. So I said, I won't rush you. I think I'm a good writer, and I guarantee it'll be written exactly the way you want it. And anyway, he put his hand out. He said, well, let's get cracking. I said, when? He said, Friday. So this is on a Monday. I'm thinking, well, bloody hell, I've got to take a sabbatical here. So I went into work, spoke to my boss, and thankfully she gave me, I think it was either 4 or 6 months sabbatical, and I cracked on. But when I came out of that meeting in Canning Town and I'm walking to the train station, I'm thinking to myself, right, you've just agreed to write a book. How long is a book supposed to be? And I'm like, right, I don't know. Walk a few more steps. How does it work with publishers? And I've gone, yeah, I don't know that either. I said, how long is a chapter supposed to be? How many chapters in the book? I don't know that. How does it work financially? Not really sure of that one either. What's the difference between a biography and an autobiography? Don't know that one as well. So I carried on walking after like a load of negative responses to myself. And I thought, you know what? You can do this. Kind of like using Richard Branson's mindset. Accept the task, work out how to do it afterwards. If you're enthusiastic and passionate about it, you'll work it out. So the big difference about a biography and autobiography is that a biography is, say, me, for example, writing about the Johnny Tapia book, which I did, where I'm writing about Johnny Tapia. He's passed away, and I'm writing about his life. Whereas an autobiography, you are literally the ghost of the person. So if I'm writing about James Lupton, then I've got to do it in your voice. It's got to sound like you. Anyone who knows has got to pick up the book and think, wow, that literally sounded like James was on the page. So, and the best lesson that I learned from that was pretty quick when I was doing Jimmy's book, where there's a chapter where it starts talking about the gangland warfare. And I remember the publisher got in touch with me, and they said, yeah, the manuscript's coming along well. I said, but just want to ask you something. He said, the beginning of the chapter where the gangland stuff happened, it says, the first line says, the genesis of the gangland warfare occurred. And he said, did Jimmy actually say that? And I went, no. He said, well, what did he say? I said, well, it was something like, it all started with. And he was like, well, why the fuck didn't you say that then? And I was like, right, okay, yeah, okay, I know what you're saying. Yeah, just put the words on paper exactly as they're said. So the task comes when you're there. I'm there on my dictaphones. I'm recording everything, and then you get home and then you write it all up on the screen. The task comes to be able to kind of jigsaw it back together and make it sound good. Because when you're speaking with someone, you ask someone a question and you're ghosting it, you've got to let them talk. You ask a question and you let them talk, and they're going to go off on different tangents, but you never interrupt, because they could be telling you a fantastic little anecdote that might be 10 years in the future. Then they come back to the present, then they bounce back in the past. But that's all for the person who's ghosting to write those little notes and then sort of organize the chronology afterwards. But yeah, very, very important to make sure you understand how the person's voice sounds in real life to be able to transmit it on paper. If you trust me, I've read enough books where you're reading about an American person and it sounds like a proper Englishman, or you're reading about someone from the East End and all of a sudden it sounds like they've just walked out of Oxford University having done like a triple masters or something. So essential to make it sound like the person. The other thing is just the structure of it. So I've structured books differently along the way, maybe experience, but you've got to look at the character you're writing about. So with Jimmy Tibbs, it was an old-fashioned East Ender who used to fight during the 15-round era. So I did it as 15 chapters, but I called them rounds, 15 rounds. When I did Martin Murray's book, it was 47 chapters, but it was short and sharp. I wanted it to be the ultimate page turner. So Martin Murray's book was about 80 to 90,000 words. Jimmy's was probably about 110,000 words. So you can imagine 15 chapters of that size, a long old chapter. So it was essential for me to do like little breaks in between the chapters as well. But with Martin Murray's book, with 47 chapters, some of them only being maybe a page and a half, the way I look at it is I wanted someone to have that book in their hand and be by the side of the pool in Tenerife with a beer in their hand and say, oh, this is a great chapter. How many more pages to go? Oh, there's only another 2 pages. And then say, well, I'll go up to the all-inclusive bar in a minute and get another drink. And then you start reading the next chapter, go, oh, there's only 3 pages to this one. I'll read a bit more. Next thing you know, they've read like 30 pages and they think themselves, brilliant. Okay, well, I may as well carry on reading another 50 here and done with. You've got to have that page-turning detail on there, that dialogue that's going to keep them hanging off every page. Every book is different, and I have, like I said, I have structured them differently in terms of the person I'm writing about. But in this day, I'd say nowadays, when I'm writing about people, I tend to do them short, sharp, and punchy. Anywhere between 35 to 50 chapters on 80,000 words for me is probably the standard I sort of tend to set there. The publisher will always have editors, and sometimes they can be heavy-handed with the editing and you're looking at thinking, bloody hell, I don't recognize my manuscript. So always feel free to sort of, speak to the editors and say, you've kind of taken some essential detail in there, which now doesn't let the story flow. And I understand you've got to make a word count, and I understand that that's your job. But if you're not happy with what the editor's done, let them know straight from the outset. Don't let them edit the whole book and then come back. Ask them to maybe show you a couple of chapters. Because sometimes an editor will go and brutally take out your forward, put it in as a chapter somewhere else, invent their own preface and move that forward. And all of a sudden you're thinking, this is not the book I've written. So I would say probably 7 times out of 10, I've always had to sort of kind of guide the editor as the editor guides myself as well. If you can get that kind of teamwork going right from the get-go, then you're going to make the book the best it can possibly be. Other tips with writing the book: photos. You'd think it'd just be as easy. Well, James, you know yourself, you've done more than enough journalism stuff. You get a photo from someone, then you think, right, I can just put it all out everywhere. No, especially when it comes to print. Because firstly, if you take a picture of a person, you got to make sure that you get their permission for it. Secondly, if someone forwards you a photo for the book and you say, right, did you take the photo? Did someone take it? Have they got permissions on it? Are there royalties connected to the photo, etc., etc., etc. A lot of publishers will have deals with the likes of Getty Images and PA Images and those sort of people, and might say we'll give you 10 to 20 images on us, and the other photos you need to check. Sometimes even get disclaimers from the people saying I'm happy for that photo to be used, or the person who's taken a photo, you can have it from me royalty free, that sort of thing. In terms of the income from books, well, a lot of people think, oh, getting my book out there and I'm going to be a multi-millionaire. Well, not happening. Certainly unless you're maybe Alex Ferguson or someone like that. But Alex Ferguson will be making the multi-millions. As a ghostwriter, these days I just tend to sort of charge a fee outright. And you're going to start working with a lot of people that will say, this is going to sell 1 million copies, and and we're both going to do well out of it. Well, if you think it's going to sell 1 million copies, brilliant. Pay me my fee, and then you keep everything. If the person's not in a position to be able to pay you a fee, then you can say we'll go 50-50 on royalties. And that in itself sounds great, but it's not as much as you think it is. So if a book costs £10, 90% of it goes to the publisher, but they're taking all the risk. They're marketing it, they're advertising, they're getting the ISBN numbers, and they're physically printing it. Whereas, say, if me and you decide to make a book and we do it all ourselves, we might spend 20 grand on books, then have a garage full of them, which get eaten by rats, maybe caught up with a local flood, and then we're in the shit. So whereas the publisher do all that, and you have zero financial risk in there. It does mean, however, that if you're splitting the royalties with the client, and the book is, say, £10, that means you're only getting 50 pence gross each, which means you might clear between 35 and 40p per book sale. So you then have to try and get them sold as much as possible. Downloads, you get a little bit less, but again, it's all down to the sales. Where you can make good money is if the book goes into a film, or it goes on the television, or something like that. Yeah, that's about the sort of the whistle stop of writing a book. Apart from that, the best advice I was given was start writing, write some more, and keep going until it comes to the end, and then edit, clean it, and see where you're at. It's about getting a long manuscript out there. Try and aim for sort of between 80 and 100,000 words for an autobiography, and then see where you go from there. It's all about shining a torch into as many dark corners as possible about the life. Also make that decision from the very beginning of whether or not there's a good story in there. Boxers, football players, etc. We can all be a boxer, we can all be a football player, we can all be an athlete. What differentiates us from having a good book that could sell on shelves? So, for example, I was approached a couple of weeks ago by a boxer and former world champion. Zero backstory. Basically, he was a good kid at school. He came from a fairly good family in terms of like well supported money, did well at school, got all his GCSEs and that. Never got in trouble, and good amateur career, professional, won his titles and retired, and that's it. It's more of an article than a book. And then you compare it to someone like Martin Murray, 4 prison sentences before he's 24 years old. And then his boxing career. I mean, that's a sensational backstory in there, or Jamie Moore, or whoever. So having the backstory side of things is extremely important. What's going to help sales as well is what is out in public domain versus what the person can bring to the table. With Martin Murray, at the time we started writing the book, there was only a little mention about him having done prison time before, but not what he did prison time for. And it was the only link we could find online was about him having done 1 prison sentence. The fact that he'd done 4, and one of them was abroad, there was none of that in there. So new detail is very, very essential. And another thing as well, if you're dealing with someone who's got a criminal record, ask them if they got the criminal record, because you want to find out exactly what's gone out through the system. Because firstly, it means if it's gone through the system, you can mention it. Always check with your client in terms of the detail though of the crimes, in case you know that the amount of detail that went through the courts corresponds to what you're going to mention in the book. But also, if it's not on the criminal record and they've done a naughty outside of that, then you can't mention it. Otherwise, you're going to get that person potentially arrested because it's a new crime. So very, very important stuff to remember. Again, a good editor and a good publishing company will have someone in there who can pick up on these things to say, hey, listen, I think if you put this in there, you're both going to get in the shit, and then obviously you pull it out. So let me see other things that are very important along the way there. That's about it for the moment. I'm sure that with a few questions from yourself, James, I can probably give it a little bit more direction.
This is it. So touch on something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned page turners, short, sharp chapters. Something I've noticed a lot of your books. I'll sit there currently reading Paul Bankey's autobiography, and I find myself sitting there doing at least 3 chapters in a sitting. Was that intentional from your end?
It became intentional, I think, probably after about 3 books. When I first, like I said, Jimmy's one was long old chapters. I had it in my head it's going to be 15 rounds. You know, that was going to be the chapters. Paul Ingle's book turned into about maybe 20 chapters, not even. But my 3rd book was actually about a deep sea diver. And that one turned into a sort of, I think, a 30+ chapter sort of book. And that's where I really started to get the hang of the page turning. And it was, I've given that example before about sitting by the side of a pool wanting to sort of, turn chapters. And that's what happened. I had a bit of a moment where I was abroad somewhere, and I think I was in Greece or something, and I was reading another book, an autobiography about someone. It might have been a footballing one. And I found myself sitting there saying, oh, I want to go to the bar and get a nice cold beer here. And no, it's another bloody chapter. And it's only 2 pages. I've got to read that one now. So I start to weave that experience of reading that book and then making a little note for myself and saying, right, that's it. That's the style I want to go for. Something else that suddenly occurred to me, actually, another little holiday thing, which started when I started working on Jimmy's book. At the very beginning, I used to sleep. It was almost obsessive, but I used to sleep with a little notepad and pen by the side of the bed. Because sometimes I suddenly wake up, it could be something in a dream where I'd say, oh my God, if I don't write this down, I'm going to forget this. Because I wake up in the morning and say, was it a dream or what did I remember? So, and I often used to walk around with a little pen and paper in my hand. It's in my pocket, so that if an idea suddenly came, I'll be on the train, or I mean, these days, put it all in your phone. And it's a lot easier, but sometimes it was just quicker for me to say, get the pen and pad out, write that little note there, and then you can add on to it at a later time. So those little things certainly help. But in terms of the page turning aspect, I'd say third book in is when I started to do the short and sharp chapters, and that's something which I've tried to stick with ever since then. It's we've all done it before, where you've written a chapter. And so you read a chapter and you thought to myself, you're halfway through it and you start flicking through and say, you know what, I might just speed read the last sort of 10 pages because this is just not pulling me in. But if it was probably split into 3 or 4 chapters and maybe you can pepper them up a little bit more, then not only are you going to get the person's attention, but they're more likely to remember it and be able to regurgitate that to someone else afterwards and say, you know what, I was reading this book and there was a couple of chapters in there which were about so-and-so and so-and-so, as opposed to saying, well, there was a chapter there which was 10,000 words, and actually all I remember was 2 fights in it. So, yeah.
Something else also you mentioned to me probably about 4.5, 5 years ago now. You'd said to me, I'd asked you, what's the first thing you'd do when writing a book? You told me it needs to have a strong foreword. You need somebody in the public eye, somebody who's well known for the foreword. Why is that?
So it helps with marketing and financial traction of the book. And every book I've done, I've always, I think with the exception of 2, I've always had a name in there, big name to pull the book forward. So with Jimmy Tibbs, it was Barry McGuigan. He trained Barry for the latter part of his career. And Barry's a great talker and he's a natural writer as well. But obviously I spoke with him and then, ghosted it and wrote it up. And then Barry went through it with a fine-tooth comb, as Barry does, and it came out to be nicely polished. Other ones, I mean, with when I did Paul Ingle's book, there was almost like very fortuitous timing with that, because I'd spent about 4 or 5 hours with Frank Maloney, and when he was still Frank, and I remember meeting in Maidstone, I think it was, and I always remember he said to me, this is probably the longest interview I've given to anybody in my life. He says, people know me, I'm not very patient. And he says, but for Paul Ingle, I'll give everything. So, and he was brilliant. But then about 3 weeks later, one of Paul Ingle's mates said, have you bought the paper today? And I said, no. He said, well, you might want to buy the Sunday Mirror or whatever it was. And I went, mate, I said, I haven't bought a paper in years. I always look at the internet. I mean, do yourself a favor, get down to newsagents and see what the front page is. And he said, I'm no longer Frank, I'm Kelly. So I really respected Frank, Kelly now. And I got in touch soon after the operation and said, listen, I just want to sort of saying that takes a lot of guts. And, if you want to have a chat or whatever it may be, and we've got, Paul Ingle's books coming out next year. I think it was like April at this point. And said, I would love to have the foreword by Kelly Maloney. And so we spoke. Kelly now, we're having a good chat. And the fact that Kelly at the time was all over the news, it was massive, massive news. It was making worldwide sort of tremors in terms of the transition there. And getting the foreword done by a name that was that publicly well known and in the lights really helped with marketing the book, and then probably got a few more quid in as well, especially when we got Kelly along to a launch up in Scarborough at a big golf club where Sky Sports were there with Johnny Nelson, etc. Other books, Martin Murray's book was Jamie Moore. Jamie Moore's forward was by Ricky Hatton. There we go. So yeah, getting the big names out, it always helps. One of the books that again, try and do your research always about the first one of the first things I tell the person I'm working with is, I need your little black book. I need all your friends, your family, and basically their whole route, their whole journey in life is going to be about crossing paths with people, and they're going to have anecdotes. So no matter how many stories you think you've got in your head, and we've all got millions of them, when you start speaking to friends and family, they're going to resurrect stories which the person you're writing about would have totally forgotten. And the next thing's like, oh yeah, I forgot about. Did he mention so and so? Did she say this about me? And I was like, no, okay, we can throw that into the melting pot as well. So those anecdotes are essential. But with the boxers, for example, you start looking at who they fought, and then sometimes if they still get on with them, and can I speak to them to get a few quotes? Because every chapter as well, what I do is I always have a quote at the beginning of each chapter. So you take, for example, the Paul Banky book you said you're writing at the moment. So I interviewed everyone from Robert Garcia, who was sparring partner of Paul Banky, which then turned out to be great afterwards when I was working for Boxing Monthly, because I was able to get Mikey Garcia for interviews. But Paul Banky was sparring partner of Freddie Roach when Banky was only 14 and Freddie was 18. So we got the forwards done by Freddie Roach. So that was, sort of brilliant as well. But speaking with Banky and getting all his friends was fantastic, because as an purely American client, I was then getting in touch with gyms in tiny little parts of California who were giving me detail about what he was like in training, how fast he was as a runner, talking about everything from the LA Lakers and Magic Johnson, Dr. Jerry Booth, who was in charge of the Lakers, through to parties at Dr. Jerry Booth's house and all this sort of stuff. So the networks that you will create from writing an autobiography, say, for example, as yourself, James, if you were to write an autobiography about whoever at this point, as a journalist, your little black book will triple with names just from writing that one book, just because you'll have interviewed them for that book. Same with Martin Murray, same with everybody. With Murray, I mean, crikey, it was everything from Tony Bellew through to David Price, through to you name it. And so yeah, very, very essential to get them to open up that little black book. Very essential to, once they've opened up that black book, you get the extra anecdotes from it. And from those extra anecdotes, you will then choose the best ones to say, right, which one can I use as a prologue, and which one can I use as a forward?
Letting them speak. As a ghostwriter, it's their words. Now, you also said 80 to 100,000 words in an autobiography. Let's say, for example, we're doing an article, you're looking at, say, 1,500 words tops. What is the difference between, or how do you get them to talk more in depth for a book? Or do you still ask your questions in between? And then when you're writing it up, you just take out what you've asked and you then build up?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like all of the above, really. So when you're writing your autobiography, say the difference between maybe an article where it could be, say, 600 words, 1,000, 2,000, and most of the time you're kind of taking a snapshot, say, where, I don't know, let's say we're talking about Joe Calzaghe against Jeff Lacey, then it'll be like, Calzaghe, you might start off the article by saying, Calzaghe explained that with 2 fractures in his hand and cortisone injections, it was looking unlikely that he was going to fight this weekend, and but the Newport favourite said X, Y, and Z. Newbridge even said X, Y, and Z, and then you sort of put the quote in there. When you're doing your autobiography, the first question I'll ask is, right, so you're born on this day. Do you know how much you weighed? And some of them will say yes, some will say no. Any complications with the birth? You're literally starting from then and moving on. Some people don't. Some people might say, right, the book started at the age of 7 and they moved forward. I think with Martin Murray, it was like that because there was so much detail. I always say get as much detail, as many anecdotes you possibly can down there. I interview everything between 20 up to 100 people for each book. And someone like Martin Murray probably had 150, 200 if I wanted it. the anecdotes were sort of, hard and fast coming. We had probably edited out 15,000 words. Half of that was to do with the fact that Martin didn't want stuff in there, and half of it because you trim it down at the end. You just want the fillet steak left and not the fat. But yeah, in terms of the word count, you think, my God, that's a massive number of words, but it comes together. By the time you've spoken to a few people, and then you say to them, right, tell me about what were you like as a kid, and then you speak to the parents, and then before you know it, you've got 15, 20,000 words there. And yes, when you're writing up, there's always questions that come up in between. So let's say Martin Murray's told me a story where he's gone to Cyprus and he's got arrested, and he said, yeah, so there I was having a shower in the cell. And I'm like, okay, well, hold on a minute. I need the color. What sort of shower was it? What was it? Victoria Plumbing's very latest rain shower with, a complimentary Ralph Lauren Polo shower gel there? I'm guessing not. So, and they'll go, oh, no. He said it was a broken pipe which was dripping, and you had to roll yourself underneath it and pretty much scrape under there. And I said that was before dinner came, which was basically a can of corned beef. We had to stick your fingers in to eat it. Okay, now we got the color. Now we feel we're in the cell. Now people feel they're reading that, and they can almost smell the heat in the cell and the squalor that he's living in there. So as you're writing, you keep thinking to yourself, am I giving the full color here? Do people really feel that they're with Martin in this cell right now? So you always got to write questions when you're doing the dictaphone stuff, because there is a limitless amount of color you can chuck into the anecdotes.
Absolutely. And just finally, just on yourself going forwards, what is in the pipeline? You mentioned somebody asked you, approached you recently. What is in the pipeline? How many, or have you got anything lined up? Any dates in mind or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm currently working with one client. I can't say who he is, but he's been involved in a lot of things with sports and various things. But we've kind of put his on hold for a bit because he's got some really massive projects coming up at the moment. I think he'd like to get those sort of executed so we can involve all of those in there. I was very, very close recently to working with a former Premiership football player, and we kind of got about a month down the track and wrote up a few thousand words, maybe about 15,000. And then in reflection, after sort of speaking with his family, basically decided that maybe it's something for him to do later in his life, but he's just not ready to do it right now. Because, spilling your life out, I wouldn't want my life in a book for everyone to read. And it's not even that interesting, but I just wouldn't feel comfortable for, warts and all to be able to do that. So, but in terms of other ones at the moment, I'm currently chatting with another couple of boxers, and something might happen along there. Something might not. We'll see. But I'm trying at the moment. I've also done a number of family commissions over COVID, for example, where the kids of parents were getting together, putting in the money together, and say, "Hey, could you write our dad's life story?" And they pay me for it, and it's non-published, just as a book, and then get it printed, and they've got it there. So I'm currently sort of throwing a few things out there as well at the moment, and I'm trying to work more at present for just a fee for working for getting paid for actually writing the book, as opposed to going for the royalties. Because I've written some books where you've got to be prepared. Sometimes you might only make a couple of £100 from a book. You put in maybe 6 to 9 months of your life in there. And, if you look at a salary, if a person earns £20,000 a year pro rata, or say £30,000 a year pro rata, 9 months of that is what, £22,500. And you could get 22.5 grand a year, just pretty much picking up your monthly check, and maybe not going absolutely crazy, flat out working, which you do when you're writing a book. And if you've worked those 9 months, including all the editing right the way to getting the book over the line published, and you only get a couple of £100, it could be quite disheartening. So that's why now I'm trying to work on just getting paid for the books. And funnily enough, it's working. People are willing to pay me a good figure to write the books. And if it's not for them, or they don't have the budget, then there's other people that can go out and write them, So I can't reveal any names at the moment, but fingers crossed, everything goes well. Should be another couple in the pipeline within the next 18 months, I'd say.
Perfect. Just touched on that. Who pays you the fees? Who do you charge the fees to? Is it the publishers? Is it the client? How does that work?
So it's about 9 times out of 10 in terms of the ones where I got paid a fee for the book. It's from the client. And on about 3 or 4 occasions, I have been approached by the publisher to say, could you write about so and so, and we'll pay you 10, 15 grand, whatever it is. Then they offer an advance also to the client. Say, I don't know, it depends how big the name is, but let's say it's a big name, then they might offer them 150, 200 grand, whatever. And if it's a really small name, then no advance, and the publisher won't offer to pay your fee. They'll sort of say, well, you guys can work out royalties if you want. So, but yeah, if somebody's going to pay me, 9 times out of 10, it tends to be the client, because then, as I say, if they're that confident it's going to sell 1 million copies, then I say, well, good on you. Pay me the fee if you're that confident, and you keep your £1 million afterwards, and I'm very happy for you. So, but when it doesn't work out that way afterwards, if the person can usually afford to pay, say, a 5-figure sum to pay to write a book, 9 times out of 10 are not really worried if it's going to make any money or not, because they have that sort of money in the first place.
Absolutely. Paul, been a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for delving into your ways and how it's done.
James, thank you very much for having me on Slothbox. I really appreciate having been invited on the show, and I wish you the very best moving forward.